The following program is made possible by the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College, CUNY.
In recent months, some of this country's most respected publications have had to admit that their reporters sometimes used unethical practices to produce sensational articles. As a result, papers as prominent as the New York Times and USA Today inadvertently published stories that were either partially or wholly fabricated or contained language that was stolen from other publications, otherwise known as plagiarism. How widespread are these problems? Why are they happening now? Is enough being done to stop them? I'm Sarah Bartlett, and this is our topic today on USA Inc. Joining us today is Steve Shepard, the editor-in-chief of Business Week, the nation's largest business publication. Steve is widely recognized in journalistic circles for his high ethical standards. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about some of the problems that have been occurring in the journalism industry and what you think is going on.
Well, we've had some very celebrated cases of plain old plagiarism and making it up to the cardinal sins of journalism. We had the New York Times, Jason Blair, and Jack Kelly at USA Today, the most recent examples. And it's very, very terrible, and it reflects very badly on the entire profession when this happens. It doesn't happen very often, but it's a very, very bad thing and undermines public trust in journalism.
Why do you think it's happening now? I mean, it seems to me that I pick up the paper and I read new cases almost every day.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Well, it's really hard to say. I've thought about this a lot, and I can't point to two or three things that are going on within journalism that are creating this. And to the degree I think there's some general problem, I think it's really larger than journalism. You know, we've been through a period of ethical lapse really throughout the society, in government, on Wall Street, in business, corporate boardrooms, in the accounting profession, the legal profession, regulatory agencies, and even the Catholic Church. So, you know, journalists are part of the society, so whatever is in the water that's causing some ethical lapses in the society is affecting journalism as well.
So you don't buy the notion that maybe standards have suddenly gotten higher and that practices that were okay 10 years ago are no longer okay?
No, plagiarism was never okay, and making it up was never okay. So, no, I don't buy that.
What about the internet? To what extent has technology made it just so much easier that people can do this more often than they would have in the past? Yeah,
well, the internet, of course, has changed a lot of things, and it creates certain pressures on journalism, but it doesn't create pressures for plagiarism. It creates pressures for doing it faster, which may lead to certain shortcuts. But, you know, plagiarism isn't a shortcut. Plagiarism is you know, an outright sin, and making it up, you know, you have to be an unethical person to do that. So I think it creates certain pressures, more competition, get it out the door faster. The standards on the internet are less rigorous than they are in most print and broadcast media. And, you know, there are a lot of things to be said about internet journalism, but, you know, that people can say anonymously anything they want, and it's not subject to the checks and balances that most publications go through. But I don't think you can blame the internet for fabrication.
You're the head of an organization that is highly regarded in this country. How do you prevent this kind of problem happening at Business Week? I used to work there. I know that we have had occasions where we've had problems there. But what can you do? What can managers do to stop this? Well,
the first thing you do is you have to have a set of guidelines that state clearly what the ethical premises are. And we talk about, you know, the rights of the press under the First Amendment, and we have extraordinary rights, and we're extraordinarily protected. But with those rights come responsibilities and obligations, and so we have to codify what we say are the obligations of journalists to avoid conflicts of interest, to avoid plagiarism. It doesn't say, you know, do not commit plagiarism, and that's like saying do not commit murder. Although maybe we do need a 10 commandments, I don't know. So you need the code of ethics. You need people to sign it once a year. You need people to disclose any potential conflicts of interest, whether they're family conflicts of interest, whether they're stockholding conflicts of interest, and then you enforce those, make sure that the conflicts of interest don't come into play. You don't let people write certain stories if they have family members working for that company, or if somebody in their family owns shares in a company, they cannot write about that company. So first thing is have the code of ethics, make people sign it at least once a year and make it available to new people, and then enforce it. Say you can't do this, you can't do that.
But how do you know if someone is deciding I'm going to make up a source because this would be a great quote if only someone had said it?
Yeah.
How does an editor spot that kind of thing? How do you train editors to do that? How do you make sure that your reporters aren't just lying to you?
Yeah. Well, there's no complete safeguard. If somebody wants to subvert the system, they can do it. It's not always possible to spot a made-up quote or a made-up name. Sometimes you can. Something sounds fishy or too good to be true, or who is this source? It's hard to spot, but it's not impossible to spot. But I would be the last one to say that we have a system, or anyone has a system, which is totally foolproof.
Is there anything you can do in terms of training editors to be more alert to this kind of thing? Have you had to institute anything at Business Week in the wake of these scandals?
We have done more training of journalists, particularly in matters having to do with the substance of what's going on, to make sure that they're more knowledgeable about accounting, for example. But in terms of the ethics stuff, we had an incident, 15, 18 years ago, in which the radio broadcaster for Business Week took material from our Inside Wall Street column before it was made available to the public and traded on the stocks that were mentioned in there. And he was caught. He was caught by the New York Stock Exchange, basically, which saw patterns of trading. And not only was he fired, but he went to jail. He was actually convicted of insider trading and served time in jail. And we had one other incident that I'm aware of where somebody didn't make it up, but used material from another publication without proper attribution, and we fired her. And I think that's very important. I think slaps on the wrist are not the right approach here. I think if somebody says, well, they never did anything wrong before, and it's cruel and unusual punishment to throw them out, it's a capital punishment for a non-capital crime, I don't buy that. I think if somebody violates rules of plagiarism, that is stealing from somebody else or making it up, that to me is a capital crime, and they should be fired. And that's what we've done in the 2 instances in the 20 years that I've been editor.
But should they be rehired somewhere else? I was reading recently that Mike Barnacle has now been rehired, or has been hired at the Boston Herald, was fired from the Boston Globe, and the editor basically said, I think it's going to be just fine. How do you feel about that?
I wouldn't do it. I mean, I just don't think it sends the right signal. And people serve jail terms and then they're done and they're supposed to be able to go back and earn a living. That's fine. I don't think people should be punished forever. On the other hand, I think it's important in maintaining the standards that if somebody commits that kind of a crime, you have to say, I don't want them working at my publication.
What about anonymous quotes? What's the policy at Business Week on that?
Well, we prefer to have things on the record, but everyone knows that there are certain information that you cannot get on the record, that people are willing to talk as long as their name is not used, and they often have very valuable information. So the rules are that a reporter has to disclose the source to the editor of Business Week, and so we know who the anonymous source is, and then we make a judgment the source is credible, and we want to use the information, and we will attribute it to an unnamed source in the least general way we can, as specific as we can possibly be without violating the source. But we'll never get away from unattributed information in the media, nor should we, because it's a valuable source of information. But make it as specific as you possibly can and make sure that the editors know who the source is. Prevents, safeguards making it up. And second of all, you can evaluate the credibility of the source for the particular information you're getting.
Do you feel like other publications have been a little sloppier, a little looser about their use of anonymous quotes, and that's allowed people to sort of hide behind that and generate this fictional work?
Yeah, I think reporters probably give away too much in the sense of granting anonymity, when often if you push the source a little bit, they're willing to have some stuff on the record and some stuff maybe not. Oftentimes I see the most innocuous stuff not attributed, and I say, well, why can't you name that person? And oftentimes you can. So we're probably too promiscuous with it. We shouldn't give it.
Reserve it for the
reserve
times
for
when
times
it's
you really need it. That's absolutely right.
You mentioned some of the things that are being done at Business Week to prevent financial conflicts of interest. The range is quite wide in the industry, is it not? And how do you feel? I mean, some people say, look, as long as I disclose that I own stock, I can go ahead and write about that company. Do you agree with that?
No, I totally don't agree with that. I know there's that school of thought, particularly covering Wall Street, where someone, a journalist who's also an investor, will say, I own stock in that company, so therefore I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I'm much more credible than you, objective, fair-minded reporter who doesn't own stock. I think that's nonsense. It's essentially like saying you have to be a baseball player to write about sports. You have to be in the Army to write about the military or defense policy. You have to be an astronaut, for God's sakes, to write about the space program. I just reject that. I think there's a lot to be said for professionally trained, fair-minded journalists to go in and cover a subject without being a participant in that subject. So I reject that totally.
Are you aware of the differences with, say, Fortune and the Wall Street Journal, and do you feel that your policy, I guess why do you feel like your policies are correct for you, and why hasn't everyone adopted it as an industry standard?
Well, industry standards in the media business make people nervous because of, First Amendment protections, and nobody should tell us what to do and all that. And, the media has a role to play. We're foot soldiers in democracy and all of that stuff. And, we take that seriously. But I think we've maybe gone too far in saying we shouldn't police ourselves a little bit better. No one wants a government regulatory agency, and industry groups have to be voluntary. So the American Society of Magazine Editors, for example, has codes of ethics which we subscribe to and but they're voluntary. They can't tell us what to do, but most magazines subscribe to these. And they work pretty well. But I do think that the media in general has to step up its self-regulation and make it clear what the definitions of off the record, not for attribution, things naming jurors, is that allowable under our policy or isn't it? So I think we can do more in a voluntary sense than we've done up till now.
Is there much conversation amongst editors to try and fashion something that's solid?
Yeah, sometimes people call us and say, well, we're trying to redo our code of ethics, and we understand you have a pretty good one. May we see your code of ethics? And we say, sure, it's public, it's available, and if you think it's good and want to use it, great, because to the degree everybody is on the same page and practices ethical standards, then we're all better off.
We all win.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
The Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College of the City University of New York is the largest and most diverse accredited business school in the United States, offering high-quality, full-time, and part-time degree programs at the undergraduate, master's, and PhD levels. For information about the Zicklin School of Business, please visit our website, zicklin.baruch.cuny.edu. That's zicklin.baruch.cuny.edu.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with Steve Shepard, Editor-in-Chief of Business Week. Steve, in some of the publications, if you're a family member or a mother or a father of the journalist, you're also restricted to some degree in the stocks that you can own. Is that fair to a journalist? I mean, aren't they allowed to make money too?
Our rules say if you want to invest in a broad-based mutual fund, that's okay, so long as you're not the mutual fund writer. But or if you want to invest in an index fund, the S&P 500 index, we allow that. Anything that's big and diversified in which the reporter can't possibly have any influence on the movement of the stock up or down, we allow. We just say you can't own individual stocks, you can't own sector stocks. If you're the technology writer, you can't buy a technology index fund. But if you want to buy the S&P 500, we allow it. So we say people can participate in the stock market if they choose to, but we don't allow short selling, we don't allow frequent trading. People want to invest and be long-term investors in an index fund or a diversified mutual fund, we allow that.
But what about family members? Do you feel like it should extend to them? And
well, immediate family, if you have a 17th cousin somewhere, okay, but if it's your spouse, your children, close siblings, parents, then we say you or members of your immediate family are subject to the same investing guidelines.
And if you found that some journalists, they just don't want any part of that, and we're losing some good talent because they won't accept that?
No, It's never happened in my experience. And you know, in the case where somebody owns a particular stock because there was some family involvement, they simply recuse themselves from ever writing about that company. So we've had a couple of cases of that over the years. And that's okay. They own the stock. I can't tell them not to own the stock, but I can tell them they can't write about it.
Now, that's one way to preserve objectivity with regard to investing, but there's so many other things that journalists write about. Politics, for instance. Can a registered Democrat write objectively about President Bush, and how do editors manage those kinds of conflicts?
Yeah, well, you know, there was an editor at the Washington Post some years ago who said, I will not vote because I think it, you know, creates a conflict of interest in me. And if that's the way he felt, then fine. He doesn't have to vote. I would never say to somebody, you can't vote. I would say that there are professional standards about fairness. And if you feel that you're such a partisan Democrat or Republican that you can't write fairly about President Bush's Medicare policy, then don't. And you should declare that as a conflict of interest. But you know, I mean, everybody has biases, that's certainly true, and you can't screen out for every possible bias or psychological predilection or whatever. What you can say is if this is of such magnitude in your own mind that it might influence the way you would write it, then declare yourself in conflict and don't write about it. So I think that can be managed. I mean, there was some, you know, discussion about reporters, I can't remember which paper it was, it may have been the Times a few years ago, about marching in abortion rights.
It was the Times.
Yeah, abortion rights demonstrations and writing about it. And I think that's probably fair to say that if somebody is that much of an activist that they're going to go march in a right to life or pro-choice rally, that they probably are so partisan they probably should recuse themselves or be recused from writing about abortion. I wouldn't say that they shouldn't vote. I mean, I think that's, you know, a fundamental act of citizenship. It's done privately to seek a ballot.
But I think, you know, there's also the civil rights of reporters. I mean, if a reporter is doing a very objective, fair job in their day-to-day work, and then on the weekend, in their private time, they want to express their own personal opinion, is it fair to say that they can't do that?
I would never say they can't express their own personal opinion about any subject under the sun. What I would say is, does it influence your ability to be a fair-minded reporter and writer on that particular subject?
And if they said no, it wouldn't?
Then I would probe a little bit, and they may be right. They may convince me that, and I may know enough about them to think that they are fair-minded and this wouldn't influence them, that they can compartmentalize their private beliefs and their journalism career.
But that depends on conversations taking place and editors being vigilant. I guess the public at this point, I think, really doesn't think that journalists are objective. Is it possible for journalists to be objective? Should they be objective?
Yeah, objective is not a word I like in this discussion because that's not the word I apply to business. The word I apply is fairness, because we want people to, we do analytical journalism, and we want people to take a position. This is a good thing, this is not a good thing. We want it to be well reasoned and well argued, and we want the other side of the story to be represented. But, you know, if you're doing analytical journalism, you have to tell people what you think George Bush's speech on Iraq added up to. And that's the kind of journalism we do. So it's not exactly objective, meaning totally on the one hand, on the other, 50-50 neutral. That's not what we do. Some people do that, the AP, fine. What we expect is fairness. We want the facts to be right. We want the interpretation to be flow from those facts and to be a reasonable interpretation. And we want the other side of the story represented, even if in a subordinate way. So I'm for fairness, and I like that word better than objectivity.
Increasingly, I think we're seeing within both television and print journalism a tendency to have very strong points of view, not just having an opinion, but really almost an extreme bias in the way an issue is presented. Why do you think that's happening, and is that okay for journalism?
Yeah, I think it's what I would call the rise of partisan journalism, and I'm talking about things like talk radio, which up till now has been identified as very conservative. Something like Bill O'Reilly on Fox, or even Lou Dobbs on CNN, who's taking this extreme position on the outsourcing question with a series he does every night called Exporting America. He's taking a strong point of view in the context of an otherwise normal hour-long news show, of which he's the anchor most of the show, meets the standards of television news. His other segment, he puts on a kind of columnist hat, I guess, and argues this thing night in and night out, and doesn't he doesn't represent the other side at all, really. Occasionally he has a guest who will argue with him. I've been on there arguing with him. But, and I think that if it's identified as commentary or it's a columnist, that has its place. But the more this creeps into the media in general, it worries me. And it worries me because the audience seems to be demanding that. People are much less comfortable with other points of view other than their own. They want to hear what they want to hear, and they're not as open-minded, it seems to me, as they used to be. And that worries me a lot, because that will push journalism in the direction of niche marketing to various political sectors. You know, well, this is for the far right, and this is for the liberal left wing, and you know where to go, and you never hear another opinion that doesn't agree with your own. I think that's dangerous.
So the discourse, the kind of discourse in this country will be hurt by that. But at the same time, I'm guessing that ratings have gone up since Lou Dobbs started this, and you know, I think in general people are trying to sell newspapers and magazines in a very harsh economic climate. What's the antidote to that?
The antidote is that basically all of this is in a context of a marketplace of ideas. As long as there's a lot of diversity in the media, as long as there's somebody up there who's somewhere arguing the other side of the outsourcing debate, for example, then Lou Dobbs can say what he wants. Even if on his show you don't get the full story, there are other avenues to look for this stuff. So it's a marketplace of ideas. It really is. And as long as there's diversity of ideas in the marketplace, then I think we're largely okay.
One of the big issues that's taking over the journalism world right now is this issue of having named the Tyco juror. The Wall Street Journal and the New York Post, as you know, identified her. Juror number 4 is now, we all know, Ruth Jordan.
Yes.
Was that a bad idea, and what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, it was a bad idea under the circumstances. The unwritten rule, again, because you can't have written rules about the press, is that you don't name jurors. And by and large, that is honored. In this case, they thought there was a reason to disclose her identity because she seemed to give an okay sign to the defense side, which some reporters interpreted that way, some didn't. And the Journal thought that made her newsworthy, and therefore they could name her. I don't see what was gained by naming her. I mean, they could have reported what happened and just said it was juror number 4. And once her name got out, all kinds of people could get in touch with her and threaten her, and that's what happened, and it was a mistrial. So I don't think that judges should say, order the press not to do this, that, or the other thing, because that's prior restraint. You can't do that. But I think the press itself ought to be enough self-contained and have enough awareness that they should take it on themselves not to do things like that, because it doesn't serve anybody's interest.
Well, I guess the other question, though, is if they don't do it, it's all over the internet. I mean, nowadays we don't have such, a small number of publications that are controlling information. It's everywhere. And so isn't there a danger that you're just turning into an anachronism if you abide by these sort of self-written rules and leave it to the rest of the world to get their news from the internet?
I just don't think we should let the bad drive out the good. Just because somebody is following a bad practice on the internet by running lurid pictures, or the Danny Pearl episode of the Wall Street Journal reporter who was killed in Pakistan, the internet ran some very graphic, lurid pictures, and the press by and large didn't. And
in Fallujah recently too.
Yes, that's right. And you can argue about the news value of some of this, Fallujah, but just because somebody is doing something bad doesn't mean you should do something bad. We need to have our own set of standards and let the market sort it out, that people will recognize that Business Week or the New York Times or whatever has a certain set of standards, and there's certain things they just won't do. And we will attract an audience of people who believe in those standards. And if the internet wants to run lurid pictures or pornography or disclose the name of jurors or whatever they want to do, I can't control that. No one can control that, nor should it be controlled, but let the market sort it out. If you're the kind of person who wants to get that stuff, well, okay. But if you're the kind of person who wants fair-minded, responsible journalism, there has to be a place for you to go.
I guess the whole world is now questioning journalism. How important is it that we restore that faith?
It's vitally important. Even before this happened, the recent wave of the juror announcement or or some of the scandals in the media, the press was never held in high repute. There was one sort of high watermark, and it was right after Watergate, when the press was seen to be a hero for disclosing a lot of the abuses in the Nixon White House. But other than that, and it didn't last very long, but other than that, the press has never been held in high repute in the U.S., which is ironic in a country that so values free flow of information. But it's true, and I think part of the reason that we're not held in such high regard is that often it's the media that presents the bad news and or discovers bad things, and sometimes people recoil. They don't want to hear bad things, and it's a case of shooting the messenger.
Well, we need to do something to restore it, clearly.
Yeah.
We've been very fortunate to have Business Week's editor-in-chief, Steve Shepard, here with us today. We'll be right back.
Some people think of New York as the world's second home. The City University of New York, with students coming from 90 countries and speaking more than 155 languages, is the world's first university. Find us on the web at cuny.edu or call us at 1-800-CUNY-YES.
Journalists often like to regard themselves as society's watchdogs. They take pleasure in pursuing wrongdoers or humbling those who abuse the power of their positions. Given that cultural bias, editors have long understood the risk that rogue reporters pose and the need to remain exceedingly vigilant in ferreting them out. This management challenge has become even more acute as declining profit margins have increased the pressure to boost circulation and attract more advertising dollars. One way to do that is to produce can't-put-them-down publications, and one way to do that is to encourage eager-to-please young journalists to produce those high-impact stories. Obviously, any reputable publication also wants those stories to be fair and accurate, but in the zeal to deliver, some publications have paid inadequate attention to reinforcing high journalistic standards. Journalists are privileged to enjoy constitutional protections aimed at ensuring freedom of the press. That privilege requires that we maintain the public's trust. Otherwise, it will become increasingly difficult to defend our special position, and that would be a terrible loss to all of us. For USA Inc., I'm Sarah Bartlett.